It's the worst of the CBC for December 27th, 2019, the show where I watch the CBC in the baby room so you don't have to. As you know, I'm still in the Arctic, which today is way too cold to film outside. Like, the computer will literally freeze. It's like minus 35 or something stupid. And the baby's screaming upstairs. We're crying and laughing or smiling. He's doing a lot of things, so we're in his room, so he can't find us here. All right, let's get to it before the house explodes. Last night's The National was the classic example of how the CBC is like 1/3 news stories that aren't really news, 1/3 that's like human interest stories that make you feel like you're informed but not really, and then 1/3 ideological bias. So there was Rosemary Barton segment, so +1 on the Rosemary Barton scale right off the bat. And it was the worst covered story of the day, was actually the Rosemary Barton at issue. Andrew Coyne, Alina Raj, and Chantal Hebert, like they're big three there. And I really hate when they do this because I don't have a problem with Andrew Coyne's opinions. I mean, I do have some, but in general, Andrew Coyne is the stereotypical, he's conservative when compared to a bunch of far left city people. But he's very, very centrist in a lot of parts of the country, and like he's left of a lot of the Conservative Party. But they bring him on by just not being a rabid, crazy lefty, he becomes the conservative. So this is kind of how you see the sort of ideological confirmation bias just work its way into society through shows like this, because when they say things and a bunch of experts say, just naturally it becomes people's opinions. So when they were doing like the biggest winners and losers of politics this year, they were, saying the Conservative Party was the biggest losers. Actually, I totally agree. They should have won. They lost. It's like sports. Oh, yeah, there's no good losses and there's no ugly wins. There's wins and losses. But Andrew Coyne's assessment of the Conservative Party was they didn't go far left enough. Like, they couldn't appeal to leftist Toronto voters. And I really hate this because the problem is I don't think they were conservative enough that they actually didn't say it. It's like there were a lot of problems with their platform. I totally agree with this. But just they were pushing that, they basically weren't liberals, and that's why people didn't like them. And I said, no, it's because they weren't confident being conservatives, that people didn't trust them, is a bigger problem. But I mean, and they said, it was the worst political gaffe of the entire year. The HuffPost girl, Lena Rush, who moderated one of the debates, comes and said, the biggest mistake was the Conservative Party's opinion on abortion. It just hurt them. And it's like, they were pretty clear. It's like they didn't even have an answer for abortion. Yes, they did. You just didn't accept it. It was a completely CBC fake news manufactured story. In the fact that every time they asked Andrew Scheer, it's like, yeah, I'm Christian, so I personally don't want to kill your babies. I think it's wrong, but we're not going to open up the debate, right? I don't think it's morally right to abort things. I'm not a fan of abortion, but our party won't do anything about it legally. So he's basically saying, I have my feelings. I disagree with the majority of Canada, but I'm not going to bring it up again. He kept saying that. And they're like, what is Andrew Scheer's opinion on abortion? What is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? And Kay Simpson was there finally about saying abortion came up again. Because it's the most manufactured story ever. And this is pretty much how the entire at issue went. It was, just, and then they made the absurd claim that, the Conservative Party's platform was just all lies because they disagreed with her. And it wasn't lies, and I went over this at the time, but they had some problems basically saying the numbers that the liberals and the media were using to push certain issues were actually false numbers. And they basically called that lies. So that really bothered me. All right, and the biggest omission of the day, again, we're talking about, like, the stories they cover, nonsense. Like, they led off on the Home Alone story, and it was so funny, because they basically were making fun of the American media for covering the story, and like, it's not a real story, and like, it's not real news covering. It's like, but it's your main broadcast, The National, and it's the lead-off story here, so take a chill pill there. So it's just a lot of that, and like, human interest stories on the tsunami that happened 15 years ago, a lot of nothing. But there is a really important stuff happening in the world. Like 1,500 protesters were killed in Iran in the last week. I mean, they're showing the 14-year-old girl. I don't really like using children or specific people to front an idea, because I think you can do a lot better with the fact that they've killed 1,500 protesters. But you're seeing this all across the Middle East. The really important thing is the collapse of the Shia croissant due to the unpopularity of radical Islam within the population of the people in the Middle East. And listen, I get where this fights with, there's a lot of things with like the narrative they want to do on radical Islam and how they want to do with other things, but this really boggles my mind, and I think I have an answer to this. Of this story can really be done in a way that defeats a lot of the what we'd say negative Islamophobic stereotypes, in the sense that in Lebanon you have mass protests against Hezbollah, which is basically Iran. In Iraq, the protesters have had success. After being killed and shot, the prime minister and the president have resigned. So this is Muslims saying no to a radical totalitarian Islamic regime in the Iranian one that's ruling over them. And now you have this in Iran too. You can play that narrative in the way that it says, look at the Muslim population, they don't accept radical Islam. Now, is there a problem? It could be two different problems here. One is the narrative they want to push that radical Islam in itself doesn't exist. It's not even a problem. If we even acknowledge radical Islam, then the right ends up being right, and we just can't talk about it at all. We just have to pretend it doesn't exist, even when the Islamic world is fighting it. Is that the game we have to play? Or is it, we have been misrepresenting these stories for so long. We basically were moon kissing Obama when he tried to reestablish relations with the Iranians, that if we acknowledge that Trump was right and Obama was wrong about Iran, then our guy loses and people might not trust us. That could be a potential thing. It could be a marriage of the two of them. But the fact that 1,500 people have been shot dead by the Iranian regime, and the Iranian foreign minister came out and said, hey, we're not just shooting people in the head, we're also shooting them in the knees too. They're straight out admitting it. So the fact that they just can't cover real important stories like that, because that actually has wider implications in the rest of the world, because they do meddle in the West, they do meddle in Canada. We talked about Majid Johari, who is actually associated with the Iranian Republic, the Islamic Republic there, and again, CBC never covered that story. So all in all, a lot of nothing. We'll give that a 6 out of 10 for the nothing parts, but then the parts they actually tried to cover something, those were like a 9 out of 10. That was like a third, so we'll put a 7.5 plus 1 because I saw Rosemary Barton's face, which means we get an 8 out of 5 on the Rosemary Barton scale of bias. That's it for December 27th. I will see you all probably Sunday.